On the 18th of March 1967, the approximately 300-metre long supertanker, the Torrey Canyon, ran aground on the Seven Stones Reef between the Cornish coast and the Scilly Isles. She was carrying 119,328 tonnes of crude oil from Kuwait and was on her way to Milford Haven. A few hours after being grounded, 30,000 tonnes of crude oil had escaped, and a week later an extra 20,000 tonnes had been released into the Atlantic. An attempt was made to salvage her by a Dutch salvage company called Wijmuller, which subsequently failed, resulting in one fatality from the Dutch team. Due to the ship starting to break up, the next course of action was taken by the Prime Minister Harold Wilson and his cabinet to destroy the vessel and hopefully burn the remaining 20,000 tonnes of oil left over. 1,000-pound bombs and napalm were dropped by the RAF and the Fleet Air Arm of the Navy, resulting in the sinking of the ship and the burning of the remaining oil. The fallout of the oil spill meant 120 miles of Cornish coast and 50 miles of the French coast were contaminated. 15,000 seabirds were killed and massive numbers of marine organisms also died before the 270 mile square long oil slick was fully dispersed. To disperse the slick, they used almost 10,000 tonnes of dispersant, but to be honest, the more accurate term for what was used would be industrial strength emulsifiers and solvents, which weren't tested for toxicity and subsequently did more harm to the marine environment by making the oil soluble and therefore accessible to marine organisms. This was the first major maritime pollution incident in the UK, and therefore proved just how unprepared we were as a country for this. Whilst this incident itself was not enough to promote changes for a better prepared response to maritime pollution, after the Breyer incident of 1993, these two acted as a catalyst for the response we have today. Since the Torrey Canyon incident, all dispersants and oil spill treatments have to be approved by the Marine Management Organisation. There are three types of dispersants: hydrocarbon solvent-based dispersants, which are applied undiluted; concentrates, which are diluted with a 1:10 ratio with seawater before application; and high-efficacy concentrates applied undiluted. These are applied to the oil floating on the surface of the sea and greatly increase the rate of dispersal and breakdown of the oil. There are also surface cleaners that can be applied to oil-covered hard surfaces, which increase the rate of dispersal from the surface, therefore helping the cleaning process. There are also biomediation products. These are also used to enhance the biological degradation of oil. These contain or enhance the growth of naturally occurring oil-degrading bacteria. In some certain conditions, loose sorbents can be used, and they are normally in the form of powders, granules or beads which absorb the oil. Over the years, there have been some new additions in the equipment used to combat oil spills in the form of skimmer machines and sorbent mats. One technique which has remained relatively unchanged is the boom. A boom is a barrier that sits on the surface of the water and blocks the movement of the floating pollution, protecting certain areas and making mechanical removal of the oil much more effective. Booms work best in calm conditions where oil and water don't splash over or move underneath the boom. In the case of the Torrey Canyon, the seas were too rough and booms proved to be very ineffective as a way of trying to control the oil slick. As a result of the Torrey Canyon and Breyer incidents, Lord Donaldson led a review into the UK's ability to protect itself from pollution and the placement of the first UK government-owned emergency towing vessels. Since the review, the changes we have seen have been quite a few over the years. The beginning of the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency to deal with all aspects of marine regulation and incident response being the first. The second being the introduction of the Secretary of State's representative for maritime salvage and intervention. The third one being development of government-owned and operated response capabilities. The fourth one being development of proactive state intervention into maritime incidents and salvage. And lastly, the introduction of the National Contingency Plan. Whilst none of these were around when the Torrey Canyon incident happened, these changes are a product of the lessons learned from the mistakes that were made during the incident. For example, if the Torrey Canyon incident happened now, the Secretary of State's representative for Maritime Salvage and Intervention, or SOSREP, would be the person who would be able to make the decision to have the vessel destroyed, not the Prime Minister and his cabinet, and the SOSREP would already be at the scene, whereas back then the Prime Minister and his cabinet had to be moved to RNAS Cold Rose to make that decision. I believe if we had the abilities we have now, back then, the damage caused by the oil would not have been so severe, as part or all of the National Contingency Plan would have been activated. Whilst the Tory Canyon incident did cover all 4 parts of the National Contingency Plan, which include search and rescue, salvage, clean up at sea, and clean up on shore, the reason it covered all of these points is because it took far too long for decisions to be made. This is proved by the fact that it took 10 days before it was decided the vessel would be destroyed, but by then the majority of the damage was done. If that happened now, with the SOSREP's intervention and the activation of the National Contingency Plan, the damage would have been significantly reduced.